Hello, thank you for tuning in to our presentation for Group 15. My name is Mary Gurley and my group mates are Chris, Darwish, and Romeo. The agenda for today's talk will start with a brief project overview, followed by workflow that we have been using, followed by sample opportunities we have been looking at. Next is economics and health, safety, and environmental implications of the project, followed by our conclusion, and the last slide will have references for all the pictures used. We have been working closely with our advisors toward our main goal, which is to develop a system to identify opportunities in the oil and gas business involving lease acquisition using public data. Step one of that is to identify the opportunity, appraise the venture, and acquire the rights.
Let's talk about the workflow that was used to develop the three target parishes that we've came up with so far. So first we went to Sunrise. And through Sunrise we looked at the production for 2017 by parish. And then we exported that data here to Excel. And we made an Excel sheet. With this Excel sheet, we found the total gas revenue and the total oil revenue. And then we combined these two things into a thing called barrels of oil equivalent. So we could look at gas counties that are primarily gas and counties that are primarily oil, and we could look at them on a level playing field. And so we sorted them based on the top 10 counties, or top 10 parishes for production. And so of the top 10, we then wanted to draw a 100-mile radius around Baton Rouge, which is our location, so that we could say if we wanted to go to the courthouse, we could go to the courthouse. So we drew this 100-mile radius here around Baton Rouge, and then within that 100-mile radius, the four parishes that we found that were in the top 10 were Vermilion Parish, St. Mary's Parish, Lafourche Parish, and Plaquemines Parish. So let's talk about an example opportunity where we use the methodology that we're trying to make into a systematic approach. So first, we looked at these parishes and we said, okay, so we just picked at random, we picked Vermilion Parish, and we said, what is a major company that's publicly traded operating in Vermilion Parish? And so using NASDAQ, we found that Stone Energy was in the top 5 publicly traded companies operated in Vermilion Parish. And then so we went into Stone's 10K report, which they released to their investors earlier this year. In their report, they talked about how they are merging with Talos Energy, and they are working on large projects here in the Gulf, in the Phoenix Tornado, Ewing Bank, Amberjack, and the Pompano fields. And so with that, we saw that they had the majority of their money allocated to these offshore assets that they were going to go at. So then we went back and we looked in the 10K report for what they had going on in Vermilion. Next slide. So when looking at their Vermilion assets, we found a lease here where they had 2 wells in the lease. This first well here listed in green, they had drilled, and it is actively producing. It's been producing since the early 1990s. And so with this production, and it's still being producing, it's a good well. When where there's oil, there's going to be more. But just farther northeast, there is another location where they were going to put a well, but they had expired permits. So they planned on doing a drilling operation, and they let their permits expire. So they're not going to do it. And based on their 10K report, we know they don't have any funds allocated to that location. So with that, this is a potential opportunity that we could go after. That there is oil in this area, based on this, and the company who's operating it does not have any funds allocated to this region, and their funds are tied up elsewhere. So some of the potential strategies that we could use to go after this is first we could top lease them. And when we go in and figure out when this lease expires, we could go to the mineral rights owner and we could say, okay, we'll give you 10% down right now if you sign the lease, so when that lease ends, we get leasing rights. And that's called top leasing. And then once we would get rights, we'd give them the remaining 90% that we'd owe them. Another thing we could do is a farm out strategy, which is where we would go in to the operator and say, listen, I know you are not doing anything here, I know your lease will expire in sometime soon. Your money is tied up elsewhere. Let us do this. Let us drill it, complete it for you. And then from there, we will collect our reward. We'll get our money back and then some. And then we'll turn it back over to you. And we'll get some percentage. And maybe get some land somewhere else that you own. And that all is up to how it's negotiated. And then another option is unitization. And unitization would be where we would lease land near this area and then go in and file to unitize the area and say, okay, we want access to drill this area and we're going to make a unit and then we'll get the rights to drill from the court, which is perfectly legal and is an acceptable option. So now that we understand the process, let's talk about the economics of the project. So we based our cost to do this project on the cost of our subscriptions. And so let's just talk about the cost to run these subscriptions by a year basis. So the first one we're using is we are using Drilling Info, and we value that at about $1,000 per year to use. But because we're students, we've obtained access for free. So that's a large cost savings. Another website we're using for data acquisition is Sunrise, and Sunrise is free to the public, and so we're taking advantage of that, and we're using the data we find there. Another thing that we have to use is these clerk of court websites to get the leasing information. And right now we value that at about $1,200 a year for subscription, but we're currently negotiating and trying to get student access for cheaper or for free. And then lastly, we're going to have to use Adobe for our image recognition software to read these leases and pick out the things we want so we don't have to go through manually. And currently that we value that about $600 a year, and we currently have student access, so we're getting that for free. So that's really good. And so now that we understand a little bit about how much this is going to cost for us to do, let's talk about the HSC impacts. And so one of the main things that this project will allow is for environmental protection, and that we're creating a smaller footprint on the land that these wells will be drilled. So here, the red and the blue are two separate companies that each own half of a 2 mile by 1 mile section. Each company might want to do 9 wells to fully develop this asset, but they can't. They have to do 1 mile by 1 mile spacing. So, through unitization, which is one of the things we talked about previously in this presentation, we can take and we can do a 9 well density but still reach each part of the reservoir, which is good because we're using less fossil fuels to drill these wells and to complete them, and we have smaller and fewer pads. So now that we understand that, let's talk about moving forward. So moving forward, we still have to identify a parish, and we're currently working on that. And then once we have identified our target parish, we need to acquire the online access and the data. Once we have done that, we have to begin our data acquisition. And first we have to continue to pull this data from these websites, also taking lease data. But to get the data from the leases, we have to be able to use image recognition software. That's where Adobe comes in. And it allows us to use something that they call optical recognition characteristics. And then lastly, one of the things that we're going to look into is production optimization if time permits. And that's finding wells that need production optimization. And that takes pressure in production, so we're still working on how we might get that data. But it's something in the ballpark, and we're currently looking at it. And then lastly, we're just going to continue to look into these leasing opportunities. And so we have a couple meetings scheduled. One with a operator who runs independently. We're going to talk to him, see how he does it, and just kind of get some advice from him. We're also planning on meeting with a law professional, either here at LSU or through an LSU connection. And then we're going to continue to work closely with our advisors up to this point.